Okay, so in last week's passage, we witnessed that the severe famine that forced Joseph's brothers, minus the youngest brother Benjamin, it forced them to journey to Egypt where there was still some food available because Joseph was providentially placed in this position next to Pharaoh and was able to interpret those dreams, and he was exalted as a type of governor in the land and an administrator over the food. Well, we saw last week that upon coming to Egypt, that the brothers, they presented themselves before this man who was in charge of all the food. They didn't know at the time, but that powerful man that they stood before, that they ended up bowing before, was in fact their brother Joseph. They didn't recognize him, but this was Joseph, whom they had sold into slavery because they hated him 20 years previously. They didn't recognize him, but he recognized them. He recognized them. Joseph, he didn't reveal himself to his brothers, but instead what he does is he accuses them of being spies who had come to take advantage of the land of Egypt. And the brothers, they insisted that they were not spies, but that they were brothers of the same father. And they even added on to that they have one brother who's not there, who is no more, meaning he's dead. And that, of course, would have been the brother Joseph. And then they said, we have a younger brother, too, who is still with our father in Canaan, and that is Benjamin. Well, Joseph, knowing what's going on here, he sees this opportunity to test his brothers and to have his youngest brother, Benjamin, brought to him. And so he told the brothers to leave Simeon in prison with him, and then the rest of them were to go back and bring the food back to the land of Canaan. And then they were to retrieve their brother Benjamin, and they were to bring Benjamin back to Egypt so he could see for sure that they did in fact have a younger brother. And in this way, he would know that they weren't spies, that they were actually as they said they were. Well, the brothers, they went back to their father Jacob, if you remember, in Canaan, and they told him what this mean Egyptian had told them. But Jacob, he refused to send Benjamin back to Egypt. He said, no way am I sending Benjamin back to Egypt. Benjamin and Joseph were the only two sons that Jacob had from his beloved wife, Rachel. And she's now dead. And then Jacob thinks that Joseph is dead. And so the only one that he has left that reminds him, that brings to him this love that he had for his beloved Rachel, is Benjamin. And there's no way he's going to risk sending Benjamin on such a dangerous journey to Egypt. It's just not happening. And so the message last week centered on God's providence in bringing the brothers into this situation where they remembered their sin against their brother Joseph. We saw that, right? They even ascribed what was happening to them in this terrible situation they were in. They said, this is what has happened because of what we did to our brother. The brothers, they were brought face to face with their sin, and even though they didn't completely recognize it, they were literally brought face to face with their sin, the one in whom they sinned against. And we considered how God will providentially use our situations, he will use our circumstances in order to bring us face to face with our sin. And I wanted to put forward to you guys that was a gracious gift on God's part, that he would bring our sin to our remembrance in order that we would acknowledge it, that we would confess it, and that we would turn to Christ to be freed from it. And so that was the message last week, right? And that's kind of where we are at. But in our passage today, we're going to continue to witness this providence of God, because he's going to work in Jacob's fearful heart, the heart that didn't want to get rid of Benjamin and see Benjamin go away. He's going to work in his heart to finally send the brothers back to Egypt, where they once again will unknowingly come into the presence of their brother Joseph. And for their part, the brothers returning to Egypt, they would know that this is something that has to be done in order to save their brother Simeon from prison, or else he's just going to remain in prison. But also the famine is severe. They've already eaten up all the food that they got the first time around, and they're on the verge of starvation, so they know they have to return, but they do so, or they're going to do so, with much fear and trepidation, because they don't know how they're going to be received. Because last time that they left, when they got home, they realized that all their money was still in their sacks. The money that they were supposed to pay for the grain that they got. And so when they saw this, they freaked out because they thought, oh no, the mean man in Egypt is going to think that we stole his food, that we didn't pay for it. So they don't know how they're going to be received there. But as we look at our passage today, what jumps out to me is two things. Fear, and it's the fear of Jacob, it's the fear of Jacob's sons. But in the midst of all of this fear, we also see mercy. The mercy of God within fear. And we will come to understand that God moves in this situation to cause Jacob to trust in his providential mercy. And we will also see that God had providentially used Joseph's servant as an agent of mercy. And at the end of the passage, we'll witness Joseph's mercy toward his brothers. And I want us to make the connection there that Joseph is a picture of Christ and the mercy that's available in Jesus Christ. And so that's what we're going to do today. So if I were to boil down the whole truth of today's message, it would be this, that in our fear, we must seek and trust in the providential mercy of God through Jesus Christ. That's what we want to do with our fear and anxiety and cares, is to trust in the providential mercy of God, but specifically through Jesus. So why don't we begin this little journey by looking at trusting in God's providential mercy in verses 1 through 14. So these 7 years of famine that God had told Joseph to tell Pharaoh about, and they prepared for, these 7 years of famine, they are still in high gear throughout the whole world. And it was so severe that Jacob and his family, they were desperate. As I said, the food that they had received the first trip to Egypt, they had consumed. And so they were literally on the verge of starvation. And it was so bad that Jacob begins to rethink his command of not allowing the brothers to go back to Egypt. And so what he tells them is, you need to go back to Egypt. We're going to die. There's still food there. So go back. But upon receiving these marching orders, Judah, one of the brothers, he pipes up to remind his father that the mean man in Egypt had told them that if they came back without their brother Benjamin, that they wouldn't be welcomed back. If their father will let them go with Benjamin, then they will go. But if you don't let us go with Benjamin, we're not going. We were literally told that we wouldn't be welcome. Worse than that, he may imprison us, enslave us. Who knows, he might even kill us. So we're not going unless you let Benjamin go with us. Jacob, referred to as Israel here, the name that God had given Jacob, he processes what Judah has said, and he somewhat frustratingly asks, why did you guys tell the Egyptian governor that you guys had another brother anyways? Like, what are you trying to do to me? And Judah says, listen, he was asking us all kinds of questions about who we are, where we're from, what our father does. And all we did was answer those questions honestly. How are we to know that he would tell us, bring your little brother to me? And Judah, what he does is he then gives himself as a pledge for Benjamin's safety. He implores Jacob to let them take Benjamin so that they can get the food that they need, or else everybody's going to end up dying of starvation. And he says that he will be personally responsible for Benjamin, and that if Benjamin isn't brought back to Jacob, then he will bear the responsibility. He will bear the blame. This is what Judah says. And then he even adds a little dig in for emphasis there, if you see it, saying to his father Jacob, if you hadn't delayed, we could have gone to Egypt and back twice by now. Right? Judah, he's an interesting character, as we've learned about in Scripture. He was certainly involved in the betrayal of Joseph when they first decided that they were going to kill him and throw him down into a pit. But it was Judah, right? When they planned to kill him, he says, no, let's not kill him. Let's not shed his blood. But instead, let's sell him into slavery. See, here comes some Ishmaelites. Let's sell him to them. And so Judah was irritated of this little dreamer too, but he didn't want to go as far as killing him. Let's just sell him. Okay? Also, Judah was the one who didn't follow the customs and the traditions of the time. If you remember his little interaction with Tamar, his oldest son married this woman named Tamar. He died. So according to the custom, the next brother would then take her as a wife. He died. And so that leaves one more son that he has, Shelah, who is now needs to take her as a wife. And he says, well, wait until he's old enough and then I'll give him to you, Tamar. And then we had that old incident where he doesn't ever do that. And then he unknowingly impregnates her because he thinks that she's a prostitute. Remember that story? And so this is who Judah is. He's an interesting dude, to be sure. But what's really important that we understand is that it's from Judah, it's from the line of Judah that Jesus comes, that the Messiah comes. Here, though, Judah, in this instance, is acting bravely and courageously. He's taking the responsibility for what may lie ahead. Someone has to assume the leadership role here in this whole thing. And he's not the oldest, but Judah, he's the one that steps up to the plate. And it takes a special person to recognize that the hopes and the dreams and the success of others are upon them, and to take that burden and to put that on their shoulders. And so in that way, this distant father of the Messiah, he actually gives us a glimpse of what the Messiah will actually do. Right? Jesus left his place of glory. He took on sinful flesh, making himself low, and he did so in order to take upon himself the punishment and the penalty and the responsibility of the sin of others. So in this scene with Judah taking this upon himself, we actually do get a glimpse of Jesus. Judah was doing this to ensure their survival, and Jesus too did it to ensure the survival of his people. So in response to what Judah has proposed, Jacob the father, he says, if it must be so. And then he instructs them to take gifts with them to this mean Egyptian. Specifically, he says to take balm, honey gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Now this is interesting. You may not have picked up on this. This list of things is actually meant to remind us of them selling Joseph. Why? The Ishmaelites who brought Joseph to Egypt, if you go back and look at chapter 37, what were they carrying? Oh, it was balm and gum and myrrh. The same items that Jacob tells them to take to Egypt, the Ishmaelites who took Joseph to Egypt were carrying the same exact things. The original readers would have gone, oh, he's trying to remind us of something here. Jacob also tells them to take double the money so that they could pay back the money that was given back to them the first time. And he tells them to take Benjamin and go, right? And then Jacob says this in verse 14. He says, may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of children, I am bereaved. As his sons once again prepare to go on this dangerous endeavor, and this time with his beloved Benjamin, Jacob appeals to the mercy of God. And Jacob refers to God specifically here as El Shaddai. That's the Hebrew word for the all-powerful one. And what that is it's a recognition by Jacob that in the end, he has no other choice than to throw himself upon the mercy of El Shaddai, the all-powerful one. He must trust in the providential and sovereign mercy of God. There is no other choice. God is in control of all that lies ahead for his sons. And in his fear, in his trepidation, what Jacob does is he casts himself upon the mercy of God. That's all he has. And as the chosen people of God, as you rightly know, we too have times of fear and times of anxiety. We don't know exactly what lies ahead. And the thing is we have also no other option than to throw ourselves upon the providential mercy of God. God will work through situations and circumstances to bring about exactly as he has ordained and willed according to his sovereign purposes. We must trust in that. Think about this. I was thinking about this as I was considering this idea, being in fearful and anxious situations. Mary, the mother of Jesus, was faced with a scary situation, wasn't she? She was an unmarried, pregnant woman who she knew was still a virgin, right? And she had been chosen to carry the child of God. That would be a very anxious time for this young woman. And as she carried Jesus in her womb, she sang this song. And this is a line from the song she sang about God, even in the midst of this fear. She said, "And his mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation." In the midst of her tenuous circumstances, Mary appealed to God's providential mercy. As I said, even though it was a scary and uncertain time for her, she understood that God was acting in and through her, moving in her life. And while it was scary, it was a blessing. And what she does is she sings of his mercy. Right? Psalm 37:5 says, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act." So what I'm saying to you this morning, saints, is that as you are used by God, you will find yourself in these types of situations. Fearful, anxious situations. But you must commit yourself unto him. You must trust in him. He is merciful to act. And you must believe that your God is a merciful God. And he has a providential mercy where he will act and move within the situations and the circumstances, no matter how dire they may seem. You have to believe that. Now, I'm not saying that we just throw all caution to the wind and we never prepare and we're never prudent. We never seek godly wisdom or counsel. We just kind of go with the flow. That's not what I'm saying. That would be foolish. That would be dumb. But what I am saying is that there will be points in time when what lies in front of you is formidable. And when you know that God has called you forward according to his will, and you know that this is his way, you have to proceed. You have to step into the fear. You have to step into the anxiety, knowing that God is merciful. Jacob says at the end of verse 14, "And as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved." Do you feel that? He goes, if I'm bereaved of my children, I'm bereaved. I have no other choice. I have to leave it up to God. At a certain point, I don't really like this phrase, but I'm going to say it anyways. At a certain point, we have to let go and let God. We just have to let go and let God. We have to put one foot in front of the other. We have to proceed into the storm, as difficult as it is, all the while looking to Christ, looking to God and his mercy. There is no other choice. As we turn to verses 15 through 25, we're going to discuss Joseph's brothers fearfully coming once again before this mean Egyptian. And we also see God's providential mercy through an intermediary, specifically Joseph's servant. So let's consider these verses here. The brothers of Joseph, they return to Egypt, and this time they have along with them their youngest brother, Benjamin, the son that Jacob, their father, fearfully let go of. And when they present themselves to Joseph, he sees that they have brought Benjamin with them. And so he tells the steward of the house to kill an animal because these 11 men are to dine with him at noon. These brothers are frightened. And now the brothers have a lunch date with the mean Egyptian. And the steward, he brings the brothers to Joseph's house, and they come in with much fear. They say to one another that we've been invited to this house because of the money, because he thinks that we stole from them. And what he's going to do is he's going to fall upon us. He's going to assault us. He's going to enslave us. And he's going to take anything and everything that we have. That's why we were brought here. So with this fear in their minds, they go to Joseph's servant. And they tell him Upon their return last time, they opened their bags, and they tell him everything that happened. And when we opened our bags, our money was still in there. And so what we've done, good servants, is we have brought back the money, but we've also brought other money too. And so we want to pay for what we took last time, and we want to pay for what we're going to get this time. And they say, we don't know who put the money back in our sacks. It was never our intention. They want him to know that they're not only prepared to pay for what they took last time, but what they're going to get this time, and that they had no ulterior motive. They weren't trying to be sneaky. They weren't trying to be deceptive. They're saying, we don't know what happened. We didn't take the money. But here it is again. They're trying to make things right because they are freaking out at this point. But listen to the steward's response, and this is so critical. Verse 23, he replied, "Peace to you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. First, the steward, he sees their fear. He recognizes their fear. It's probably written all over their faces, and he wants to put them at ease. He says, "Peace to you. Do not be afraid." And we don't know why the steward would care for these foreign men in such a way. But it could be that as a trusted servant of Joseph, that Joseph may have let him in on the truth of who these men were. Maybe he knows that these are, in fact, Joseph's brothers. These are the ones that are responsible for him even being in Egypt in the first place. But at any rate, he wants to still their hearts. And this is a demonstration of his compassion. But even more, if you notice, the steward ascribes the money that was in their sacks to a divine gift. Not just a God, but the God. He says, the God of your father, the God of Jacob, the God of Israel, your God, has put this money, this treasure, in your bag. I mean, this is the Hebrew God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. At the very least, right, that means that this pagan Egyptian acknowledges the reality of their God, right? The Egyptians, they would worship all kinds of gods, but he's at least acknowledging, hey, your God exists, and he's the one that put this treasure in here. So not only does he acknowledge the existence of their God, but that their God is a giving God who is merciful. And he says, I received your money. Now, this is a little bit mysterious because we aren't sure that he was the one that actually received the money the first time and put it back into the sack. So we don't know for sure. But maybe he's just telling them that he has figuratively received their money. We don't know. But at any rate, there are a few things about this whole exchange that I want to point out to us. One is that the steward, acknowledging the one and true God as he did, that I believe of what we know from Joseph and the godliness of his character, that he's had quite the impact on this servant. What I mean is this, is that I believe that as this servant has been around Joseph for this amount of time, years probably, that Joseph has shown him who God is. And that this servant is acting in a way in accordance to who God is. And so really, that's a picture of Joseph and his godly leadership, that those that are underneath him would look to God. John Calvin said this, the excellency of Joseph is commended in his servant. The goodness and the mercy of the servant kind of shows us the godly character of Joseph. Even in a foreign land and even in his exalted position, Joseph has remained true to his God. Even in the midst of pagan idolatry, Joseph has remained faithful, and he has told others of who God is, his servants, and now they are proclaiming the goodness of God. And that is the calling of the godly, isn't it? That despite our surroundings, despite whatever situation or circumstance we might be in, that we would be obedient witnesses of the one true and living God. That's the calling of each one of us. 1 Peter 2:9 says, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. Why? That you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. You have been saved, you've been born again to be a proclaimer, a witness of the excellencies and perfections of who God is. You have been called to demonstrate his mercy and his grace and his love. Another thing I want to point out about this servant is that he was an intermediary used by God. He's kind of like the middleman. The brothers came trembling with fear about what was going to happen. But God has shown them kindness and mercy through this servant. You see that. And I bring this up because I want to make the point that God often uses people to be vessels of his mercy. God's mercy towards his people, it takes all kinds of shapes and forms. And often that is through others. And this should impact us in two ways, really. One, when we receive blessing and mercy from others, we must ultimately recognize that that is a blessing and a mercy from God. Two, we want to be prepared to be used by God as instruments of mercy. God may call you to be used to show his mercy to others. And this could happen in a lot of ways. Forgiveness, having compassion, giving undeserved kindness, being there for others, compassionate. But the ultimate expression of God using his people as vessels of his mercy is most fully realized in the truths of the gospel. As we proclaim the gospel truths to those that are around us, we are meting out God's mercy. And so God uses people to be agents of mercy. How cool is that? When have you been an agent of mercy? Or maybe sometimes we don't recognize that, but I can certainly recognize when people have been merciful towards me. And do we recognize that as God ultimately being merciful towards you? The kindness and mercy of this servant is great. And I want us to be people that are compassionate and merciful. We want to be used by God. We want to be instruments of mercy in the hands of a master carpenter. That's what we want. And this kindness and this mercy of this servant, it only continues, probably at the command of Joseph. So the servant, he releases Simeon from prison where he's being held as something that's like a collateral. He's being held until the brothers have returned, and now the brothers have returned, and so he lets him go. And also when they come to Joseph's house, the servant, he gives them water to drink, to refresh themselves. He gives them water to wash their feet. He feeds their donkeys. These are all acts of mercy, putting these brothers at ease. We're told that the brothers, they had prepared the gifts that they had brought for the mean Egyptian. High noon was coming when they would once again be face to face with this Egyptian lord. And even though they probably still had a great deal of fear, I would imagine, I do think that it has subsided at least a bit because of the mercy and compassion of this servant. So let's move on now to the meeting here, the lunch, verses 26 through 34. And this is going to be Joseph's mercy upon his brothers. When Joseph arrived, they brought to him the gifts that they had brought with them and prepared for him. And we once again, like last week, what we see is the brothers coming before him and bowing down and prostrating themselves before him. And we discussed last week that this was actually something of a fulfillment of the dreams that Joseph had had 20 plus years ago. First with the sheaves and then with the stars all coming to him and bowing down. And we read that the first thing that Joseph did, the very first thing that he did, was inquire about their welfare. He asked them how they were doing. He wanted to know what's going on with you guys, but even more specifically, he wanted to know about their father. How is your father doing? Is he still alive? I mean, undoubtedly, think about this. We haven't talked about this yet, really. But Joseph was Jacob's favorite. And Joseph has been separated from his father that loved him so much for 20 plus years now. I mean, he must really miss his father. And he probably knows that his father thinks that he's dead. And so one of Joseph's first concerns is to find out if his father's still alive. Now, it hadn't probably been a real long time since the first time they were there, but anything can happen in a short amount of time. And one of the first things that's on his mind is the man still alive? Is my father still alive? That was at the top of his mind. And to his relief, they respond, your servant, our father, is well, and he is still alive. And we're told once again that the brothers bowed themselves before Joseph. And this continual reverence for Joseph is probably a sign of their fear and their uncertainty before this powerful man. It would have been customary, but they kind of go over the top with showing respect and reverence because they don't know exactly what's going to happen. And at this point, Joseph, he catches a glimpse of his little brother, Benjamin, the brother from the same mother. And he asks the group, hey, is this your little brother that you were telling me about? Even though he knows that it is. And then Joseph addresses Benjamin directly, saying, God be gracious to you, son. And then look at verse 30. Then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother. And he sought a place to weep, and he entered his chamber and wept there. Seeing Benjamin, his little brother, he hasn't seen for 20 plus years, it was too much for Joseph in that moment. And so he left to find a place where he could weep. He was overcome at this reunion, and he knew that his tears were going to fall. It's interesting because when it says that his compassion grew warm for his brother, what it literally says is his mercy grew warm for his brother. That word for compassion is the same Hebrew word for mercy. As a matter of fact, earlier when Jacob asked for God to be merciful, it was the same word, mercy. Joseph felt mercy for his young brother because, think about it, Benjamin has had to spend the last 20 years with these other 10 brothers. And we know what they're capable of. We know how they treat daddy's favorite. It's not good. Joseph, to some degree, probably expected that as Jacob's favorite, that Benjamin received some of the wrath that he endured from the brothers. And Joseph's mercy toward Benjamin increased because he desired the best for him in this difficult situation. However, even more, Joseph's mercy grew for Benjamin because he had the power and provision now to care for his brother, to ensure that Benjamin is safe. He's there in front of him now, and he can take care of him. He can have mercy upon him. So after weeping in his chamber, Joseph, he washed his face. He returns to his visitors like nothing had happened. And he demands that the food be served and that the lunch would begin. And then we have this little bit of a strange scene here where everybody's eating by themselves. There's three groups that are eating by themselves. You have the Egyptians. They're eating at one table by themselves because they don't eat with Hebrews. That's considered an abomination. So they don't eat with the Hebrews. And then you have the brothers. They're off eating by themselves as the guests. And then you have Joseph, who is the Lord, the governor of the place, and he's nobility, so he's eating by himself. And the brothers, they were seated at a table before Joseph. And this is crazy. To their amazement, they look around, and they've been seated in the order of their birth, from firstborn to youngest. And it says that they looked at each other with amazement. Can you imagine how freaky that would be? They were so scared, and now they sit down, and they're exactly in their birth order. Nobody knows what order they were born in, except one, right? So they noticed this peculiarity. They looked around at each other. We aren't told exactly how they felt, but they must have been a bit uneasy. How could that happen? That doesn't just happen by coincidence. As the food was served, food was taken from Joseph's table to the table of the brothers. And this too is an act of mercy. Do not forget that there was a severe famine going on. What led them to come back to Egypt again was that there was no food. And here Joseph is feeding them. Unknowingly, this is ironic, it was their brother Joseph whom they wanted to kill. that is showing them this great kindness. He's not seeking to have revenge on him. He's seeking to feed them. I mean, Joseph was in this position where he could have taken them as slaves, as he had been. He could have thrown them into prison, as he was. He could kill them, as they wanted to do to him. But he does none of that. He does none of that. Joseph is merciful. He doesn't strike them down. He cares for them. He feeds them. This is the mercy of Joseph. And as the food was being taken from Joseph's table to theirs, they all ate well. But we're told that Benjamin received 5 times as much food as the brothers. Now, this could have just been a demonstration of Joseph's love and affection for Benjamin. I like him. He's my favorite. He's not one of the ones that brought this thing against me. But I do think it's more than that. I think what's happening is Joseph is actually testing his brothers. He's going to give daddy's favorite more than everybody else to see how they respond. Are they still the vengeful, murderous brothers that they once were? We're not sure why he did it, but in any case, they don't react poorly. It says that they all drank together. As the wine was taking hold, they all became merry. Things are going good. That word for merry there, it contains the connotation of intoxication. And so, to me, that tells me that the brothers have kind of let their guard down. They've come before this mean Egyptian, but they're willing to let their guard down. They feel a little bit better about the situation, and so they have this revelry with the Egyptian. So as we come to the end of our passage and we look back to where we started, the 2 things that come to the surface for me are fear and mercy, aren't they? Jacob had a fear of starvation. Jacob, the father, had a fear of sending his youngest son, Benjamin. The brothers, they also had fear that their families would die. They had fear in going back to Egypt, where he thought that they had stolen the money and that they're probably going to die. Fear and fear and fear, right? Fearful situations that are experienced by the people of God. These people that were chosen by God to carry his promises into the world, and yet here they are. However, we also saw much mercy. Jacob gave the entirety of this situation over to God, trusting in his mercy. He had come to the end of himself, and he'd realized that the only thing that he could do was give it over to the providential mercy of God. It's the only thing he could do. The brothers received mercy in the form of the divine gift in their sacks. What had brought them fear now was a source of mercy. Joseph's steward declared peace over them, telling them that it was God who had given them this treasure. God's mercy, it comes through a pagan Egyptian. And then in their fear, the brothers experienced the mercy above all mercies from their brother Joseph, as he did not seek to harm them, but sought their well-being. So a lot of fear overcome by a lot of mercy. Understanding who God is and understanding how God works, we know that it all came from the providential hand of God. It is the providential mercy of God, all of this. And so as we consider this one last truth here, in our fear, we must seek and trust in the providential mercy of God through Jesus Christ. The human experience, and I don't need to tell you this, is wrought with fear and anxiety. Even some of this fear belongs to the people of God at times, doesn't it? When we have these fearful and these formidable situations, we have to trust in God and his mercy towards his people. The amazing Puritan minister, Richard Sibbes, he rightly said this: the depths of our misery can never fall below the depths of mercy. God's mercy is always greater. God's mercy trumps everything. Just as we sang in our song, our sins, they are many. What? His mercy is more. If we truly understand what God has done for us in Christ, we will be able to understand that our fears and our anxieties, they can never outpace God's blessing. They can never outrun God's love. They can never be greater than God's mercy. Never. Never. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't have fear and we won't have anxiety, but what it does mean that in the midst of it, we will seek and we will trust in God, who has given us all things, including mercy, in Jesus Christ. Through his life, through his death, through his resurrection, Jesus has freed us, his people, from their greatest enemies, sin and death. He has conquered the enemy of our souls, the serpent, who is Satan. Brothers and sisters, listen, fearful situations and circumstances, they will come. I promise you that. But in those times, we are to remember and declare the great mercy of God in Jesus Christ. We are more than conquerors through him who loved us. And so what is the fearful situation? What is the fearful circumstance that you find yourself in right now, or that ominously hangs above you in the horizon? What is it? Well, I would encourage you to meet it in the strength of God, trusting in his providential mercy. The writer of Lamentations, who is probably the prophet Jeremiah, as the people of Israel are dying and being taken captive, everything seems to be going chaos, and he's in great fear. But he writes this in Lamentations 3:22 through 24. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. His mercies are new every morning. They cannot be exhausted. Jesus Christ is the fountain of mercy. And so hope in the mercy of God. Hope in Jesus Christ, the one in whom all the mercies of God are contained. Amen.